Open your mouth.
Richard shoved a black ball gag into the girl's mouth, cuffed her hands, forced her into a large storage container, and roughly tied her arms and legs together with rope. Kara was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe, but Richard still sealed her inside the container without mercy. Through a narrow crack, she watched the neighborhood disappear behind them, but with the gag in her mouth, she could not make a single sound to call for help. By the time Kara saw daylight again, she had already been taken to Richard's apartment. The bed was covered with all kinds of strange tools, and Kara's heart immediately sank. This kidnapper was clearly not after money. He had something far more disturbing in mind. Ignoring her terror, Richard stared at her coldly and laid down his rules.
1. I will always have this gun or some other weapon nearby. 2. You will always call me Daddy. 3. You will listen to everything I say and do everything that I tell you to do. If you want anything, you'll have to ask for permission. And most important, if you break any of the rules, there will be consequences. Understood?
Kara wiped away her tears and obediently called him Daddy.
Yes, Daddy.
Satisfied, Richard ordered her to sit on the bed before interrogating her about everything from her name and age to her address and family background. When he learned that 15-year-old Kara had a boyfriend, his expression instantly darkened, but when he heard that she had never slept with anyone, a disturbing look of excitement flashed across his face. Kara gradually began to break down as she answered his questions, but her nightmare had only just begun. Richard ordered her to lie on the bed and subjected her to a degrading examination using various tools. Afterward, Kara went into the bathroom to clean herself. She noticed that the apartment contained many women's personal items, and the hairbrush was tangled with long blonde hair. That meant a woman probably lived there with him. Before Kara could collect any more information, Richard entered the bathroom and subjected her to another round of abuse. Kara forced herself to endure everything calmly. Although she was terrified, she kept reminding herself that staying calm and gathering information were her only chances of survival. She carefully played along with Richard and did everything she could to avoid provoking him. After getting what he wanted, Richard was in a good mood. He was also convinced that Kara could never escape from him, so he gradually lowered his guard. During their conversation, Kara learned that Richard had grown up poor and never attended college. After graduating from high school, he spent 9 years in the Navy before leaving the service. As Richard spoke about his past, his voice suddenly softened.
You know, I'm not looking to hurt you. Not if you don't make me. When I'm finished with you.
Breathe. Wait.
But a moment later, he raised his gun again and ran his hand across Kara's skin. Her heart was pounding like a drum. Unable to endure another second, Kara suddenly lunged toward the door. Richard immediately grabbed her by the hair and shot her dead on the spot. But none of that had actually happened. It was only the outcome Kara had imagined in her mind. She understood that one reckless move could destroy her entire escape plan. For now, her only choice was to endure. However, Richard made an even more disturbing demand. He lit a pipe and decided to teach Kara, who had never smoked before, how to become addicted. Kara took one breath and immediately began coughing violently. Richard showed no mercy and continued forcing her to inhale the smoke. With no other option, Kara asked him to demonstrate the correct way to smoke. Richard proudly showed her and then blew the smoke directly into her face. Kara asked him to demonstrate one more time, but Richard suddenly lost patience, pulled out his gun, and threatened her into obeying him. To stay alive, Kara had no choice but to endure another assault. Richard was pleased with her obedience and told her that she had earned a reward. Kara looked toward the living room and asked how many animals he owned. Feeling generous, Richard allowed her to look around by herself. He then began talking endlessly about how much he loved animals because he enjoyed the feeling of keeping living creatures under his control. Without revealing her intentions, Kara asked what he did for a living. Richard said with disappointment that his current job was extremely boring and that he spent every day working around air compressors. He had once lived in San Diego and still missed the city. Richard then promised Kara that he would release her once he was finished with her.
But what happens next is up to you. If you go and report me, you will always be the girl who was raped. Sit down. We are going to watch this.
Suddenly, strange sounds began coming from the television. Richard's so-called reward was forcing Kara to sit beside him and watch an explicit adult movie. Kara felt as though she were about to collapse, but all she could do was grit her teeth and endure it. She cautiously asked whether she could use the bathroom. Instead of giving her privacy, Richard stood in the doorway holding his gun and watched her the entire time. As Kara washed her hands, Richard suddenly ordered her to stop.
Ask permission.
May I wash my hands, please? Daddy.
Yes, you may.
His disgusting gaze moved slowly across her body before he told her to help him prepare dinner. Kara said that she was not hungry, and Richard's expression immediately turned hostile. She quickly offered to help clean the apartment instead. In reality, she wanted another opportunity to gather information. While sweeping the floor, Kara noticed a business card from a dental clinic attached to the refrigerator. She quickly memorized the phone number printed on it. When she passed the printer, she also memorized the information on the documents beside it and every note written on the nearby calendar. Most of the notes were related to Disney, but the 16th had the words "coming home" written beside it. That was probably the day the woman who lived there would return. Halfway through cleaning, Richard suddenly lost control and ordered Kara to remove her clothes. After assaulting her again, Richard turned on the television news. There was still no report about Kara's disappearance. Richard immediately used this to manipulate her, repeatedly claiming that nobody loved her and nobody was looking for her. In reality, Kara's mother, Deborah, had contacted the police as soon as she realized her daughter was missing, but when the officers heard that Kara had only been gone for a few hours, they did not take the report seriously. Teenage girls running away from home was simply too common in their eyes. Deborah explained that all of Kara's belongings were still at home and insisted that her daughter must be in danger. Even then, the officers remained completely indifferent. With no help from the police, Deborah began searching everywhere and asking everyone she knew whether they had seen Kara. Every answer brought another disappointment. Desperate and nearly out of options, Deborah returned to the police station and begged the sheriff for help. But just like the officers before him, the sheriff continued delaying the investigation. He casually told her to go home and wait for news without assigning anyone to search for Kara. Without realizing it, their inaction was giving the criminal even more time. This was far from Richard's first crime. The lack of attention given to vulnerable teenage girls, combined with the police department's failure to act, had allowed him to succeed again and again, behind closed doors. Richard was a twisted predator, but in public, he knew exactly how to disguise himself as an ordinary, harmless man. Every night, he spoke affectionately with his wife over the phone. Whenever she called, he forced Kara to hide inside the storage container to prevent her from making any sound. Richard shoved the gag back into her mouth.
Breathe. Wait. Escape. Survive. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Kara soon began coughing, furious. Richard ripped open the container and demanded to know why she was making noise. Only after realizing that the gag was preventing her from breathing did he remove it. He then warned her that if she made even the slightest sound, he would kill her. Kara was terrified. She covered her mouth tightly with both hands, afraid even to cry. After finishing the phone call, Richard brought Kara a sleeping pill and ordered her to swallow it. Kara pretended to take the pill. When Richard looked away, she carefully watched his every movement. She saw him secretly hide a box. Later, while Richard was washing up, Kara considered attempting an escape, but the chance of failure was still too high. She had no choice but to remain patient. Richard's cruelty did not stop even when it was time to sleep. He cuffed Kara's hands and feet and chained her to the bed before finally falling asleep. The next morning, Richard was still snoring beside her. After waiting for more than 10 hours, Kara knew that her opportunity had finally arrived. She carefully worked the lock around her wrist open and slowly began freeing her ankles. When Richard showed no reaction, Kara quickly pulled on her pants and quietly entered the living room. Every step filled her with fear. Using the layout she had memorized the day before, Kara carefully made her way toward the front door. She moved the robotic vacuum cleaner blocking the entrance, held her breath as she unlocked the door, and then took one deep breath. The moment the door opened, Kara ran for her life. She sprinted through the maze-like apartment complex without looking back. After taking several wrong turns, she finally reached the road. By pure luck, a car happened to be approaching. Kara rushed into the street, stopped the driver, and begged for help.
Station, please. Please.
Get in.
Thanks. It was that apartment. I need you to remember that for me, please.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Only after the car began moving did the tension that had consumed her for more than 10 hours finally ease slightly. With the driver's help, Kara reached the police station. The moment she entered, she calmly explained what had happened. When the desk officer heard that she had just escaped from her kidnapper's apartment, he was too stunned to react. Kara had to remind him to write down her name. She also handed over the handcuffs and ankle restraints, explaining that they could contain Richard's DNA. She was probably the calmest kidnapping victim the officer had ever encountered. Without hesitating or losing track of her thoughts, Kara clearly described everything she had endured.
White, medium build, brown hair, with a gun yesterday morning, and then he raped me multiple times. And then I escaped this morning while he was asleep, and then those handcuffs and this.
The officers stared at her in disbelief. Nobody could understand how someone so young could remain so composed after surviving something so horrific. Sergeant Bonnie Jennings questioned the driver about the location of Richard's apartment. Unfortunately, the driver only remembered the general area and did not know the exact building number, because Kara was still a minor and had just survived a kidnapping and assault. Sergeant Jennings took over the interview. The police then discovered that Deborah had reported Kara missing 18 hours earlier. Realizing how serious the situation was, they immediately contacted Deborah and told her to come to the station before her mother arrived. However, the police needed Kara to return to the apartment complex and identify the building. Most victims would have refused to go anywhere near the place where they had been held captive. But Kara's courage was extraordinary. Without hesitation, she agreed to guide the officers back to the area. Unfortunately, every building in the complex looked nearly identical. Even the longtime residents could not provide the police with useful information. Just as the officers began losing hope, Kara suddenly stepped out of the car.
He's got like a wolf curtain kind of over his bed, and he lives with a lady with long blonde hair. Wall full of animals. He had birds, rats, hermit crabs, guinea pigs, that type of stuff. A lot of fish too.
Oh yeah, that's apartment 301. Yeah, 301.
By retracing her escape route and recalling the details she had memorized, Kara was able to identify the correct building. Her observation skills once again left the officers amazed. They repeatedly praised her for doing something so remarkable. With Kara's information, the police quickly found Richard's apartment, but by the time they entered, Richard had already disappeared. Everything inside looked exactly as Kara had described it. The ropes and tools lying on the bed also confirmed that she had been assaulted. The sheriff immediately ordered officers to block the surrounding roads and prepare a nationwide alert for Richard before they could issue the alert. However, Kara needed to identify him from a photograph. By then, Deborah had arrived at the police station. The moment mother and daughter saw each other, all the fear and pain Kara had been holding inside finally poured out. A short time later, Sergeant Jennings showed Kara several photographs of possible suspects. Kara fought to control her emotions and immediately pointed to Richard. Richard was still on the run, so Sergeant Jennings asked Kara to provide every detail she could remember. What Kara revealed next left everyone speechless.
He was honorably discharged from the Navy at least a couple years ago. And the gray parakeet that he has, actually I think it's a cockatiel, is named Clyde, and he's had it longer than any of his other pets. The woman that he lives with is probably in Disney World right now with somebody else, so he's got to go back to work tomorrow. It's something to do with like air compressors. Family doctor's name is Dr. Reitz, and the phone number for that is 803-555-6714. He's got a history of anxiety. And he's got a dentist as well, whose name is Dr. Greg Nublin, and the number for that is 803-555-8562. 803-555-8562. There's a box, a big box too, underneath all of his animal cages that he did not want me to know about, so you should probably find whatever that is. You should find that.
Every piece of information Kara provided was useful. The police immediately launched a search based on her clues. Meanwhile, a medical examiner prepared to collect physical evidence from Kara. Kara was worried that her mother would not be able to handle the examination. Instead of thinking about herself, she gently told Deborah that it was okay to wait outside. On the drive home, Deborah wanted to know exactly what her daughter had experienced, but Kara did not tell her about the worst moments because she did not want her mother to suffer even more. The large storage container Kara described led the police to a horrifying discovery. Richard was not a first-time offender. He was a serial killer who specifically targeted attractive underage girls. Every girl before Kara had been killed.
Holds these children for days. Then he drowns them in his bathtub and dumps their bodies in the swamp. That task force has been working those cases for 5 years.
Richard's wanted posters soon appeared throughout the city. Kara's family and friends also joined the search, but Richard was extremely cunning. During his escape, he changed vehicles, making it nearly impossible for the police to track him. Fearing that Richard might return for revenge, the police stationed several officers around Kara's home, but the constant attention made her deeply uncomfortable. All she wanted was to return to a normal life, as long as Richard remained free. However, the protection would continue, and not every officer assigned to Kara treated her with compassion. One white-bearded officer showed no concern for Kara's emotional condition. Instead, he made several cruel remarks that left her feeling even worse.
You know that guy was going to kill you, right? And he's likely killed at least 3 girls. Now, the evidence hasn't come in yet, but it will. You should thank your lucky stars that you were next.
Luck had nothing to do with it.
Just as Kara began withdrawing into herself, Lieutenant Aaron Rowland stepped in to comfort her. He explained that without the information Kara had provided, the police would never have discovered so quickly that Richard was connected to several murders. The department was grateful for everything she had done. Kara possessed a rare combination of courage, intelligence, and strength. When Richard was finally caught, she would deserve more credit than anyone else. Lieutenant Rowland's words gave Kara the encouragement she desperately needed. So when Deborah once again tried to stop her from going outside, all the emotions Kara had been suppressing finally exploded.
He's not here! I am right here! I need to go back and do the things that I usually do. I need everything to be normal, okay?
Deborah could no longer find a reason to keep her daughter locked inside the house. Reluctantly, she allowed Kara to go out and spend time with her friends. While Kara was watching her boyfriend Ryan's game, she suddenly overheard a girl behind her talking about what had happened to her. Kara immediately turned around and confronted her.
Do you know me? I didn't think so.
She refused to waste her energy worrying about other people's rumors. Meanwhile, the police located Richard's wife at Disney World. To their surprise, she knew absolutely nothing about his crimes. In her eyes, Richard had always been a kind and responsible man. As well as a perfect husband, they had appeared to love each other deeply. Richard's sister, however, had a completely different opinion. She had long suspected that this was not the first serious crime her brother had committed. The police were encouraged to learn that Richard had contacted his sister the previous day, but when officers rushed to the address she provided, Richard escaped once again. The only thing he left behind was the shirt Kara had been wearing when he abducted her. Not long afterward, Richard arranged another meeting with his sister. The police immediately surrounded the area and prepared an ambush. Before long, Richard appeared. The officers closed in and launched a full pursuit. Realizing that he had nowhere left to run and refusing to face justice, Richard turned the gun on himself. With one shot, he ended everything. The next day, Lieutenant Rowland told Kara what had happened. Kara felt that death had been far too easy for Richard.
I petted him. And I wanted him to go to jail for 100 years, and I wanted him to rot there. But only after I got to stare him down in court. And I made him face me, and I got to tell him about everything that I remembered. And I let him know that picking me was the biggest mistake that he's ever made in his life. I don't know, I'm just mad at him.
Without a trial, it felt as though nothing had ever happened. Richard was gone, while Kara was left to carry the weight of everything he had done. Lieutenant Rowland did not see it that way. To him, Kara was a hero. He told her that given the opportunity, he would hire someone as intelligent and courageous as her without hesitation. The movie is based on a true story. The real Kara Robinson later completed law enforcement training and became a police officer. She went on to help many victims of sexual violence and child abuse. The courage and intelligence she displayed while trapped with Richard remain a textbook example of how calm thinking can save a person's life. The movie also exposes the twisted nature of a predator like Richard Evenitz. Every glance and every movement he makes sends a chill down the viewer's spine. But the most frightening truth is that monsters do not wear signs announcing what they are. They can look like any ordinary person living right beside us. True compassion does not mean placing survivors under a spotlight and overwhelming them with attention. It means treating them like human beings and recognizing the extraordinary will to live that no tragedy can ever define. See you next time.